Who is the most tech-savvy sports league right now?
You put me on the spot because we work with all of them. So I don't want to say one is ahead of the other. I think they're all different. I think the NFL is doing some really interesting things when it comes to the implementation of technology from a media
Hmm.
standpoint. I think, to your point, Formula One is
It
light
is.
years ahead of these other leagues when it comes to on the track performance. And we were talking about that before. I think the NBA is doing a phenomenal job when it comes to social media and fan
Hmm.
engagement. So I think it's such a broad, right? Technology is so many different things that it's not one size fits all. I think that all the leagues are doing it in a very different way. That's, obviously more applicable to them and where they're at in their maturity. Yeah, but certainly a lot of room for improvement in other areas, right? Where they're maybe behind.
Hmm. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. This is a conversation with Jim Caruso, an AI entrepreneur and chief innovation officer at Elevate. This company works with over 1,000 sports and entertainment brands to turn data into game changing insights. Jim didn't follow the traditional sports ranks. He came from the advertising and tech, providing a fresh, disruptive perspective on fandom, engagement, and decision making in sports. I'm your host, Sid Bensalah. Today, we'll explore how smarter, not bigger, AI is revolutionizing the sports industry. From building more innovative fan connections to reshaping leadership strategies, we'll also discuss the practical realities of AI adoption in high stakes environments and what the future holds. To support our show and keep the stories going, please check out the episode description for more. Let's get started. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Your path into the sports industry is, let's say, unconventional. Can you explain how you got there?
Absolutely. My entire career has really been spent at the intersection of what is now called product management, or a facet of it is product management. When I was in college, there was no such discipline. It was you were an engineer or a very technical person, or you were on the business side and a salesperson or marketing person. And the two didn't really interconnect. What I was able to do was kind of blend those two worlds and understand how to translate what customers were wanting or what they were indicating that they wanted, the features, the functionality, but also just the need state. What were the problems that we were trying to solve for them? And marry that with understanding how that could actually be implemented from a technical perspective
Mhm.
and bridge those two worlds together. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I spent the early part of my career working in various industries, education, B2B software, corporate, helping corporate networking, things like that. And then in 2010 transitioned into advertising and marketing. And through the next 14 years or so was able to really understand and work and had the pleasure and fortune of working within every facet of marketing and advertising, starting with media and technology and pivoting into creative, and then later on even starting my own agency and software company that was geared around understanding and unpacking consumer behavior. What do people care about? What do they do? Why do they do it? And how do we marry those two things together to build out really complete and comprehensive connections with them as a brand? Fast forward about 2.5, 3 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer, and I sat down with the people at Elevate and started to talk to them about what I was working on and started to understand the intimacies of sports and entertainment as it relates both to the industry and the machinations of it, but also specifically the technology behind it. And you start to draw these corollaries, right? The ability for me to understand how to move ad inventory, digital ad inventory from publishers to advertisers and using programmatic media and real-time bidding and all these other technologies, ad tech and martech systems to do so. And you take that and you unpack it and you find that there's a lot of connections in the way that ticketing
Hmm.
works. You have ticketing inventory, you need to move it through a series of different pipes and platforms and stages and put it in the hands of a customer, right? And give them the ability to buy it. And the more we started talking, the more I found that there was a lot of opportunity to take all those lessons I learned across every industry, but obviously more recently, specifically in marketing and advertising, and apply that lens into sports and bring through the ability to find new or different ways of using technology, but more importantly, finding ways to shape the front, you know, future of the businesses, right, that operate within the industry.
Interesting. Was there a turning point when you realized AI could solve real challenges in sports, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's so interesting about what artificial intelligence can do, and again, that's a very broad
Mm.
term, right? So we use that as a catch-all. There's a lot of complexity to this there, and I try to break it down, and I won't by any means say I figured it out, but I try to break it down as simply as possible. And when I think about the ability for AI, it really centers on large language at the moment on large
Mhm.
language models, the ability to process massive amounts of data. What I think people really have a hard time wrapping their heads around, and almost, it applies equally to a lot of people, is just the sheer amount of data that a computer can process relative to a human, or even a collection of humans, a company of, the scale is not logarithmic, it's
Mm.
exponential, right? The ability, you see these statistics where they tell you so and so LLM was trained on X amount of data. If people had been reading all of that data and trying to comprehend it, it would take them 10,000 years of continuous reading. Like the scale of which the ability for technology and specifically LLMs to capture and synthesize and store and then be able to quickly retain and respond with a lot of information is astounding. When I throughout my career, more recently though, I've been working on software products that the real challenge they typically call is like the last mile challenge, right? How do I take all the information, all the intelligence that I'm building out into my application and cross that last mile to deliver it to a
Mm.
user in a way that's going to be simple and actionable and useful to them? And for the last 20, 30 years, it's typically done through charts and graphs. And we took analog things that we did by hand and we put them into a digital format. I would write presentations out, I would write documents. Now I can use a word processor or use PowerPoint to create those
Mm.
documents. And as typically happens with technology, people are, I say reluctant, but also it's challenging to understand how to completely rethink the way you do things. So oftentimes we take the things we were doing, right? The first websites, they literally took a picture of newspapers and then put the image on the website. And it was like, great, now we have a website. And you're like, wait a minute, like you're not really maximizing and utilizing this new medium in its most capable way. AI has been transformative in its ability to solve that last mile problem. For us to go and talk to a user and say, what's your challenge? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, I'm trying to understand how my fans interact with beer brands when they're not in the stadium, right? What do they purchase when they're out of this, when they're at the grocery store? That's a
Mm.
question. They have a question. They're trying to solve a business problem with that question. In the past, it was okay. Well, now I'm going to have to figure out how to collect that data, how to put it into a format that's usable, how to then go in and create that audience of fans that you're looking at, select the attributes that I'm looking at, produce a graph, the steps, and I'm trying to consolidate it for the essence of time. But you can imagine it's dozens and hundreds of steps, and even then, you're requiring someone to like really understand and look at this data and try to ascertain the value of what they're seeing.
Yeah.
What AI has done, right, is turn that and say, I don't need a degree in data science. Forget, let alone a degree in data science. I don't even really need to be all that sophisticated or know how to manipulate data or need to. I can go into a prompt and put in my question. What are the top 5 brands that my customers are interacting, right? And that's a question. I can put that into a prompt and I can get back an answer in seconds that's going to give me what the information that I need. And I think that's transformative. It gives and it empowers any user at any time to access data in a way that's never been possible before.
Jim, what's the biggest misconceptions sports organizations have about AI?
I think with any new technology, AI or other, there's always the tailwinds or the in the environment and the ecosystem that says, hey, you must be adopting. If you're not adopting something like this, what you're getting left behind, right? You think about 10, 15 years ago, you don't have a mobile app. Everyone has a mobile app. Why don't you have, and then brands and teams, oh my God, I must develop a mobile app. What are we going to do with it? I don't know, but everyone has one. Like we have to have one. And then you go, well, how did that work out? Well, it depends, right? A lot of people had these apps and they realized no one's coming to them. There's no reason to. There was no utility for them. So I think AI falls into one of those new shifts, paradigm shifts. I like to say, I think if you looked at the shift that the internet, mobile phones, and social media caused, which completely changed our lives, like every facet of our lives, both between us interacting with technology, but also us interacting with each other. You wrap those all into one. I think AI is 10 times as big of a transformation as that. And so when that happens, you've got such a spectrum on the adoption curve, right? And what I mean by that is you've got early adopters, you got people who are going to be later on, and then you've got the middle. And those early adopters are trying to experiment and find ways to make this useful. And what typically happens is what you see, right? Well, chatbot, we should put a chatbot on our site, or we should put a chatbot on our, we should make it easier for people to interact with us. I think the challenge is how is that actually making the user's life better, right? How is that making your customer's life better? What is the utility that is providing? And in some cases, there is some, right? It was harder to ask a person this question. I can get it, and I had to wait for someone to respond to me. I can now go in and I can use a chatbot that's trained on all these data points and answers that we've already had and all this information we have, and they can give me an answer quicker on it.
Yeah.
How do I think those are very easy, tangible things for people to latch onto. I think the more advanced ones are where you start to rethink the way you do things. And I think really interesting examples like, I don't know if you saw this article came out during the American football season, NFL, about how players started to think, well, geez, why am I training the same way, watching videotape in a static environment? All of this video has been loaded up, right? And all of this information is available to me. Why don't I use VR and AR and basically an AI LLM that's been trained on all of this performance data about how players move and how they react, and I'm going to train and immerse myself in real time, right? If I do this, I can have data now that would tell me how other players on the other team would react. And there's a whole article in the New York Times about Jaden Daniels and his method of using this and how it can speed up, because in sports, a lot of this is reaction based on the field, right? You're not able in hundreds of milliseconds or less, you can't actually process the information you need unless it's intuitive and you've done it before and it's repetition and your brain can quickly process the signals. And I thought that's fascinating. Like that to me that's fascinating, right? Because now you're not just saying, hey, let's take something we were doing over here and maybe it took 20 minutes and let's use AI to make it take 10 minutes. You're not just like transitory kind of yes, let's make this incrementally better. You're rethinking the whole way in which you can use the access and the data and the insight that can be unlocked through AI to do something that you were doing before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is many examples. You mentioned football, but there is so many examples. Motorsports, for example, simulators, which in motorsports, especially Formula One, they've been using those solutions and features since maybe more than 15 years. But within the past couple of years, it evolves to a scale, to a quality, to a standard where it's like basically you sitting on a real car. Sailing has adopted the
That's
same.
right.
Many sports they're using it. And everyone talks about AI transforming fan engagement. How does it actually work, Jim?
Yeah, so it's a great point, and I think that's one where the AI, the example you mentioned, Formula One, is a great one, because that's another where people early on realized the value of all this data and the value that data could have. They just didn't have the tools, right? And it's like I said, that's that last mile, right? Like We know if we could just get the, but we didn't have a tool that would let us synthesize 50 years of, I don't know how far back, of race data and quickly synthesize it and then allow us to tap it, so they were doing it incrementally. So it's a great example. It's really fascinating. I think in terms of what the second point you mentioned, that's where things come into play about in two ways. One is LLMs are very useful at the things that we've already talked about, right? Taking in massive amounts of data, processing it, allowing you to create correlations and connections between that data, things that are very hard for a human to do. That at the end of the day is still only as good as the data that's flowing into that system, right? If you train an LLM on a bunch of data that's not any good or inaccurate, you're going to get back a bunch of inaccurate answers. And a lot of what you see when people talk about models or AI bots, oh, they're hallucinating. It's not that the answers that the information they're coming back with is wrong necessarily. It's or inaccurate. It's only as good at it might be wrong or inaccurate, but it's only because they were looking up or trained on data that was wrong or inaccurate to begin with, right? And so, that's where there's a little bit of, you have to understand and unpack and know enough about how these things work. So because if you just go in blindly and start using these tools and you're not getting the responses or the answers you want, you might just dismiss it as, it's not useful, it's not valuable, versus understanding why you're getting back the answer you are. When we think about the work that we do with sports teams and sports properties, I very much think about it in two worlds. The on the field, in the stadium performance, which is similar to what we were just talking about. These teams and some leagues are way ahead of others, right? To your
Mm-hmm.
point, in understanding how to use and leverage data, now that data coupled with AI to improve the performance of their organization from a on-field perform, whether it be literally like improving the performance of the athletes on the field or improving the business operations side of it, where they're trying to understand which players to select or which players to draft, so on and so forth. The other side of the equation is how do I take this information and use it to make decisions that impact my organization outside of my four walls or outside of my stadium or outside of the racetrack, right? Which is a very different construct for a lot of teams.
Mm-hmm.
People at these teams have worked, a lot of them were athletes or they worked in sports or they came up through the ranks of the team through the lens of working on the operation side of it, selling tickets, selling concession, right? They understand every facet and mechanism by which a team has to operate and have host a successful event or have a great game day. When those people leave the stadium, when they go out, then they go back home or they go, wherever they go, that's where it gets harder, right? You don't have the ability to monitor or control that data as you do when they're in the stadium and you can see what they're buying or what they're eating or what video boards they're watching. When they leave, I don't know. What I saw was an opportunity to really focus on that second part, right? How do I take the same lens at which, and it's the same methodology and the same beliefs, right? Teams and properties want to intimately understand everything and every facet of what's happening inside their stadiums, and as they should, as any business does. I always say, the example is no different. If I'm a consumer brand and I have a retail store, I want to understand what are people buying, when are they coming in, what's my foot traffic look like. I mean, grocery stores or markets, they look and can even do that to see where people's eyes are. Are they looking at the top shelf or the? I mean, that's no different than any other business, right? I want to intimately understand everything I can when I have a customer in my physical footprint, in my physical four walls, or what my digital walls, right? My website, right? Google Analytics can provide me hundreds of data points about how people interact with my
Mm-hmm.
site, and I can figure out how to use that data to improve the customer experience before they come to my website, before they come to my stadium, after they leave, what do they do? That's the big question, right? How do I understand and use data or capture it, synthesize it, access it with the same level of detail, with the same level of certainty and insight that I can get from it outside of my stadium as I do inside. And that's really what we're focused on, right? We're trying to take those two worlds and marry them together, work with providers, work with our partners, work with our teams who, like I said, oftentimes have a lot of that in-house, data about what's happening inside their house, so to speak, and marry that with what's happening outside. Help them understand what people are doing when they're not in the stadium. Where do they spend their
So,
time? What products are they
yeah,
purchasing? So on and so
Jim,
forth. Yeah,
just to jump
please.
in and on that point, so just for the listeners to simplify it, so basically,
Yeah,
you gathering as much data prior and post, let's say, a game, a match, a fixture, an event, in order to, and now we have the tools, we have the means to process all the data. And that work, basically, the main goal is to optimize fan experience.
that's right. Yeah, optimize fan experience, but also think about how to enhance that. I would say that experience in the most broad way
Mhm.
possible. Meaning, I believe there is a massive opportunity for teams and leagues to think about how to better
Mm.
monetize the fan base that they've
Mm.
built, not just when it's in the stadium, not just when it's at the racetrack,
Clear,
but all year round.
clear. And
Right? Yeah, you know,
yeah, and is there a limit in terms of how much data is required? Or we know the
yeah.
capabilities and the potential of using AI, but how much is too much? Or there is no limit, or
Yeah.
regardless? Or let's say more
Yeah.
data and better is the outcome.
You know, that's a great point. It's one where two part answer. Yes, there is always at some point diminishing returns in the amount of data. What I like to say is, you know, if I'm looking at an audience of 8 million
Mhm.
people and I'm analyzing their behaviors, if I have 8,500,000 people, is there going to probably not going to be much of a difference, right? At some point, it becomes diminishing returns from adding more and more data, whether that be more data points or more users, whatever. You know, I've reached enough where there's no statistical significance for adding more features to the data set. Absolutely agree. I think the other side of that is there is something really interesting when it comes to using LLMs and AI because it can constantly be learning. And so I do think the ability to continuously add new data now with the ability to unlock that in an easier
Mhm.
way is actually very differently, right? I would have said not going to be matter. I can't even get the insight out of the data I have, let alone
Adding
adding
more, yeah. Yeah.
more. Now I think it's completely changed. Now you go, well, but the system can learn every day from those data patterns, from new data, from new interactions with it. And it can use that and it can retrain really quickly on that data and then provide new insights based on what's happening.
Hmm. Clear. And can AI personalize fan experiences without being intrusive?
I absolutely think so. My background in marketing and advertising, obviously I have a little bit of a different lens, or I have I have a very kind of clear point of view on
Mhm.
this. You know, when I talk to people about what advertising is, and it's not even a word that's, you know, you hear it, but you don't even think about it a lot. And it touches every part of our lives. My line is, you know, why is the internet free? Right? You ask someone that question and, you know, it sparks and they go, advertising, right? You look at top 10 companies in the world, you know, outside of maybe some manufacturing, oil and gas, Meta, Google, where do the revenues come from? 99% of Meta's revenue comes from advertising, right? And you know, you look at sports leagues, it's no different.
Right.
75 to 80% of their revenue comes from advertising. By proxy, it's media rights, which is only paid for through
Mhm.
advertisers. If there's no advertisers buying media, there's no
Right.
advertising. You know, there's no media rights. There, those dollars are worth. So, you know, I think it's been a really, for me, I knew a lot of this information, but obviously, and I think intrinsically people in sports do. But when you boil it down, I don't always know that people equate the dollars that are behind the media rights for these property and where they're generating the value. I mean, outside of that, it's ticketing and it's concessions, and you know those are. But it's media,
Mhm.
right? Media, whether it's F1, whether it's NFL, it's media rights, and without advertising, there's no media rights dollars. So for me, the ability for advertisers to get to and reach audiences in a very relevant way is at the core of all of these businesses. If they can't do that, they're quite frankly not in
Mhm.
business, right? And the ability for you to find out how to make your brand relevant to those consumers, to those eyeballs, to those, wherever those people are, whether they're watching online, whether they're streaming, whether they're on your website, whatever it is paramount. If I'm an advertiser and I have $100 to spend or $100 million to spend, I want to spend it wisely. I want to reach the people that are most relevant to my brand that are going to convert. It doesn't matter how big your budget is, right? If I can't do that, it becomes very hard for me to either justify my investments or for me to feel like I'm actually understanding the return on that ad spend. And maybe I choose to deploy my dollars elsewhere. For us to make things personalized, or and I know there's so much terminology, right? Hyper personalization, you hear all these things, right? Again, to keep it really simple, I like it to think of it on a spectrum. If I have the ability to take one advertisement and one message and target 1,000 people, or take 1,000 messages and target 1,000 people, obviously I would err toward the second one, but that's also not realistic. And so what I always like to think is how do I use any data, whether now it's, very much AI driven, et cetera, but how do I take this information? How do I take this data, and how can I move somewhere on the spectrum of, I'm not going to blast one message out to 1,000 people because I know that's not going to probably be relevant to all of them. I'm also not going to be able to create where's the sweet spot, right? How do I use data to understand in a privacy safe way, to your point, which I think is absolutely, paramount to this, where on that spectrum I should be, and how do I break that down and make it worth my while to do so, right? Because to your point about is more, is 500 versions of an ad better than 5,000? I don't know, right? Like, I don't, maybe 5,000 versions are better than 500. Just because I can do it doesn't mean I should, to your point, right? And so that's where you have to think very much from a strategic standpoint. I do think, to put a point on it though, what AI can do is help us move much more rapidly to that scale. It can move so not maybe 1 to 1,000, but maybe 1 to 100. Whereas 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even, less, moving from 1 to 10 was like, okay, that's a lot of versions for people to, right? Now it can be done really quickly, so now, I do think that it helps us move toward there. I still think that you have to be responsible with this, this power, right? Or these new technologies, and also use them appropriately.
You've said the teams that use AI smarter, not bigger, are the ones pulling ahead. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think for a long time, for 10 years maybe, right, there was this obsession with big data. And everyone was told we have to have as much data as possible. We have to capture all this data. It needs to be bigger or more and more. And you lost sight when you started to lose sight of, well, what am I actually going to do with all that data? Right? And why am I capturing it? Like, is it all valuable, right? Like, I mean, just because I can do it doesn't mean I should, right? And I always come back to really simple stuff. Sid, it's like, why am I capturing this data? Is this relevant? Is it going to be used? Is it useful? If I can't use it now, maybe I could use it down the road. Then I could, but just because I can access it doesn't mean I should. I think that the same principles apply when it comes to AI. Why am I building this capability? What business problem is it solving? How is it going to help move my organization forward? Not just adding it in to add it in and saying that I have it, right? But how is this tool being deployed in a way that's going to help me unlock something I didn't have access to before? Help me to get insights to something I didn't have before. And I think that's what, when you talk about using it smartly, that's what that focus is, right? How can I solve a problem where maybe it's pricing, right? Ticket pricing. I have 5 inputs today. I don't care how good you are with Excel or spreadsheet, right? There's only so much data that can be in Excel. Can I, a hypothesis could be, well, if I had 1,000, if I had tens of thousands of data points over 10 years, which I can't do that analysis in Excel, but I can do that with an AI model, and I can ask it for answers to I'm going to get maybe a better result, right? Now that's a great use, and that's a very clear use case. And I think, like any great products, whether they're software technology based or not, establishing what those use cases are, creating hypotheses, using a very methodical approach to this is paramount. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of technology that maybe is being deployed or used, but it's not clear what the business impact of the and the application of it is going to be.
The way AI is developing at a pace, put it this way, it's a full throttle. You know, we cannot even forecast, let's say, how it's going to look the next 3 years. We might say the next 2, 3, 6 months, maybe. You know, now
Yeah.
knowing that, how does AI help teams optimize game day experiences for fans, both in stadium and digitally?
I, I think there's some very real, tangible examples. If I, as a customer, am, spending my time, spending my money, and committing to hours, minute, however long, a few hours, whatever it might be, to immerse myself in an experience, there's intrinsically a set of needs and a set of values that I have, why I'm doing that, but also a set of needs that I want to be met, right? Whether that be excitement from the game itself, whether that be connection with the fans around me, whether it be something else, great food, right? It could be all the above. Whatever those things are, the better I can understand and unpack the way in which I, as a team or league or property, can be relevant to you, can be useful in fulfilling that,
Hmm.
is paramount. The ability for me to do that really quickly and with certainty is the probably two biggest factors when it comes to doing it at a game day. Which your point, like we use very broad, game day, right? Whether it be a few hours a day, whatever, right? Like because it doesn't help me if I'm a team and I say, hey, I learned all this information about, oh, we really could have done this better. I mean, yeah, I can use it next time, right? But like the holy grail is how do I use it in, I won't say real, near real
Hmm.
time, maybe is the right. And I think that's the unlock. I think the challenge is both a technical one and a business one. From a technical perspective, you actually, yes, you can have AI and LLMs here, and you can have your game day operations and your platforms and your systems here. How do I bring those two things together, right? Because some of those things have been around for a very, very long time. The ticket scanning, the food concession POS. I mean, those are technologies that are not new, right? They've been around years,
Hmm.
10, even longer, 10. The AI very new, right? So there's a technical challenge to marry those two systems together, to bring those worlds together, to understand how to amplify operations with my existing systems, but also now add new capabilities I didn't have before. I think about, you mentioned earlier when we were getting on about your F1 fan, right? And I think that's such a great
Hmm.
example. How do I take this information and put it in the hands of fans? What are the things that I can now unlock or provide access to that they didn't have access to before? Maybe I did, but it was locked away in my internal systems, right? Teams, drivers, they had that information. There was no way, there was no conduit to make that available. I think of examples where, you might have questions as you're seeing drivers on the track and you'd love to, maybe you could actually get access to answers about it,
Hmm.
right? Where, instead of just being statically presented the data that they're choosing to show you. I think the other is much more of an operational um, challenge, right? You implement these technologies. There are thousands of people working on these events, right? Like, and sometimes like, I mean, the order of magnitude is quite high, 7,000 people at some of these, right? To manage every facet of an event. That's a lot of people to commandeer, and they're coming in and they're not there every day, right? They're just showing up on game
Hmm.
days. A lot of them, they're not full-time employees in that way. So I think that's the operational
Hmm.
challenge. Is even if I have all these tools and I've integrated all of these systems together, I now need to operationalize that. I now need to put this information in the hands of people, and it has to work, right? I can't, great, I've now got people with mobile phones and they can do, but do those phones work? Are they connected? Is the bandwidth high enough? Can it use the LLM to pull in from, I mean, like there's very real, tangible things that actually have to happen to make this usable on the ground. And so I think that's where those two things have to come
Yeah.
together, both the technology and the
Hmm.
operational side.
Let's shift gear and talk about AI and sponsorship. For our listeners, sports industry, one of the main revenue stream segment is sponsorship. Then you have ticket sales, merchandise, then F&B probably depend on the organization or the promoter what kind of inventory they have. And we know that sponsorship is a major revenue stream in sports. Do you believe that AI can help brands and teams align better?
Absolutely. So, we go back to some of the discussion that we were having earlier. My background is working with advertisers, right?
Hmm.
AKA sponsors. And on that side of the business, there are absolutely things I understand when it comes to the ability to reach consumers. Advertisers are hungry for the best way to do that. They will pay top dollar, right? There's a reason why some publishers get $5
Hmm.
CPMs and others get 50 or
Yeah.
$100 CPMs, right? The ability for me to understand how and who I'm reaching and do so in a very relevant way is paramount. I think that the tried and true ways that teams have done this, putting up signage in a building, providing entitlements and naming rights, those are all great. I think we're at a point though where all of that is really being disrupted and or is ripe for disruption, I should say, probably. I don't think it's actually yet happened, but I think when you start to think about the ways that we can now capture and harness data about consumers and understand, especially as those behaviors shift and more people are becoming fans who now have access to be engaging with a property or with a team, but never go to a stadium, right? I mean, you were mentioning F1 race in Singapore or China, wherever it is this weekend. You're not going, right? But you're fully immersed, you're fully engaged,
Hmm.
right? What are the ways in which a sponsor, an advertiser can maximize the value of your fandom of F1 or my fandom of, a sports team or a league? I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think as more teams come into the digital world and as consumers' behaviors continue to fragment, you look for these through lines, right? What are the ways in which I can, at the end of the day, to your just really great reinforcement of our conversation around personalization, that it is incredibly hard to go, I'm going to create 1,000 partnerships. And within those partnerships, I'm going to have 1,000. I mean, you start to multiply these things together. It's impossible for a business to have, if I'm a consumer products company, my business is making great consumer products. I need to advertise for those, but my specialty is not advertising. My specialty is building, or, constructing great products or making the best soda, whatever it is, right? Like that's what I'm really good at. I need to keep my focus there. And so, when you think about it from that lens, you start to understand and unpack, well, there's only so many ways in which an advertiser can wrap their head around how to engage and interact with consumers. It's increasingly hard to do that. So what are the ways in which, what are those through lines I was mentioning that connect these things? And fandom is a great example of it, right? My fandom for a team or a league or a brand of clothing or, a school, whatever it is something that cuts through everything I do, right? I'm not just a fan of it when I'm watching it on TV. I am a fan 365 days a year. I think the ability for us to uncover and unpack ways to tap into that fandom 365 days a year opens up, to your point, a fifth or sixth, depending on how we're, revenue opportunity, right? There's the sponsorship deals that happen that are largely contained within the physical spaces or TV rights, right? Which are, and then there's the and they're owned and operate, what I call O&O, right? They're owned and operated
Hmm.
channels. Yes, I can do a sponsorship, and if I do a sponsorship with Team X, they'll put out social posts from their handle about me, or so, they'll send emails on my behalf. Fine. What are the ways in which we can leverage all of the data that we can get our hands on about consumers, marry that with data from the properties, and then start to open up channels by which they can monetize that data and that data set and that fandom 365 days a year, right? Not just on game days, not just in the season, not just when people are tuning in to a match, but all year round.
Yeah, clear. I've been thinking back in the days while I was hosting major events, and we
Mm-hmm.
approach new partners and new sponsors, or we try to convince to keep while renewing a partnership agreement with existing sponsors. The model, the exercise was quite the same. Let's say if we approach new partners, we prepare the pitch deck, we get all the informations I will not say data, but the main data is basically audience reach and using various methods. And those
Yeah.
methods, they were not 100% accurate. We guess based on, let's say, the visuals, based on if it's live TV or if it's post production, how many times, how big is the A brand name appears. So you have all these things, and it was, let's say, it was a hard work with no guarantee, you know.
Mhm.
Now, listening to you and processing data, having the tools and the way to process the data at a speed which a couple of years ago, 5, 10 years ago, was unheard of. You know, we just guess. Do you believe, Jim, that when it comes
Mhm.
to negotiations, because at the end of the day, it's all about negotiations, it's all about pitching, it's all about sale, it's all about convincing, and you have
Yeah.
the human element that plays, and there is a lot of
Yeah.
emotions as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, that's what it is.
Very rational being, very emotional, irrational beings humans are.
Absolutely. Do
Yeah.
you see us now shifting to a completely different standard where AI is vital, is the key in terms of influencing negotiations between teams, leagues, right holders, and partners?
I do, but I think it goes back to the point I made earlier, which is the AI will only be as good as the data sets that go
Hmm.
into it. If I'm continuing to train AI in a way that is, you know, similar to what you just mentioned, right? How it's been done. Hey, I
Now,
will go and
yeah,
I'll
let
pull
me let
broad.
me.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Sorry to cut you, Jim. Just for
No,
the
no.
listeners, let me just add one important point. In terms of, we can forecast, we say, okay, we have X amount of audience for X amount of hours. If it's a day fixture or a couple of
Yeah.
hour fixture, or if it's a couple of
Hmm.
days or one week, depends on the type of the event. But one of the difficult task is to try to predict fan purchasing behavior. Was almost
Yep.
impossible to predict. You can guess, but then either you get it right or you completely, or you get it completely wrong. And then on the other
It's
hand,
binary, right? There's no,
absolutely.
yeah,
And
nowhere in
then you
between.
have
Yeah.
a not happy client partner, and you try to lock them for as long as it take. I'm trying to make sense of the context we live in, that using AI probably can help us predict better how fans, or let's say spectators, in terms of their behavior in terms of purchasing, because you were talking earlier about trying to understand what they do before the game, what they do after the game,
For sure.
collecting all this
For sure.
data, good quality data, and to try to process everything faster in order to take the right approach, the right decisions. This is what,
That's right.
and here you're talking about for the sake of improving sponsor targeting.
Hmm. It's a great point. I was actually having a lot of conversations about this topic this
Hmm.
week. I think that what you're talking about is an issue I identified earlier. I would say issue is probably not the right word, but it's a very unique challenge that I didn't face on the marketing side of this. If I spend $10 on Google or $10 on Meta or whatever it might be, there's a rough understanding, and what is it perfect? No, by not by any means, right? But there's a rough understanding of the ROAS, the return on ad spend that I can
Hmm.
generate. I put $10 in, I track people. Most of the time, again, if it's an online purchase, I have a chance at seeing these people were exposed to these ads, they purchased. Now, is it a one-to-one? No, like no. Is it perfect? No, but it's roughly I can understand, and I can also do it in a more like blind way of like, well, I spent $1,000 on Meta advertising this week. I turned it off for a week and my sales went down. Okay, well, there's a correlation, right? Like, and it, and I can tell that those advertising dollars reaching people on those channels is driving commercial success. What I've When I got into the sports side of it, I saw a lot of what was happening, and you were alluding to is very different than measurement how I was used to it. When I think about media measurement, I think about understanding how many dollars am I putting in, am I driving an outcome, and sometimes my entire success of my ad campaign is an outcome. It's a CPA or cost per action. I need to get 1,000 people to sign lead forms. Every dollar I'm spending has to tie back to that, and we want to do it for $100 per lead or whatever it is. What you're talking about on the sports side is what falls under the bucket of measurement, but is very different. It's really equivalency. I've exposed someone to this many impressions. Therefore, I think this is worth this much in return, or in equal value, because I could have spent those dollars elsewhere. What's missing from that equation is, who did I expose? Beyond the fact that they were in the stadium, they were fans of a team, right? Like, that doesn't tell me that they were likely to buy my product. I sell ice cream. Is every one of those people in the stadium likely to buy ice cream? Probably not. How many of them go to the grocery stores where it's sold? I don't know, right? How often do they buy ice cream? I have no idea. It gets to the heart of everything you were just saying. There's a huge gap between, I exposed you to a billboard in the stadium for my product for 2 hours, and who did I expose it to? How much is it going to get them to move? Can I track the fact that they went in and then bought that product? When I have no ability to do that. I think there's a massive opportunity to take the line of thinking, take the approach that has been, again, is it perfect? No, but tried and true in advertising and marketing, around tying attribution and outcomes for your ad dollars to what's happening on your site or in your store, and apply that to sponsorships, and apply that to this arena where you can get much more direct, again, maybe not one to one, but more direct causality between, I actually know I only want to reach these people. I don't want to reach everyone. I want to reach these 20,000 people who are actually in my target audience. When I reach them, I need to do it at that's the reach part. And the other part is frequency, right? The reach frequency, I need to do it at a frequency of X. Beyond that, it's not worth it. And below that, it's unlikely to produce a conversion. I don't need to reach 80,000 people 15 times. I need to reach 20,000 people 30 times, right? Whatever it is, those variables are what drive the foundation and my belief, and the model of what is a functioning, working advertising ecosystem, a $5 trillion business, right? Those two things need to come together. And I think there's a massive opportunity for brands and teams to learn. I mean, I think brands know it inherently, but they apply it. To your point, that's the tension, if anything, right? Because they're saying, hey, I can measure these things over here. I can put my ad dollars into Meta or Google, and it says, hey, what is your return? What you can literally put in, what is my ROAS that I want from this advertising, right? What is my cost per click? I don't want to pay more than $2 a click, because I know that if I pay more than that, it's not worth it. So if I get someone to click to my website for less than $2 and I can convert them, I know my conversion rate, it's worth it. You don't have that in spot, right? There's nowhere in a spot where you can go, hey, as an advertiser, I would like to go sponsor F1 and I want you to generate a $5 cost per click. It doesn't, right? So you're right. And to me, this was fascinating. I mean, again, I love advertising. I view it as an engine that powers, so much of the businesses around the world that's still very much not understood, or it's very much viewed from a creative lens, right? People think of advertising, they think of, oh, that great Nike ad campaign, right? They don't think of the pipes that we're talking about that are actually powering the biggest businesses on the planet. Amazon, Google, Facebook, Meta. These are all powered by advertising. They don't exist without advertising. They don't exist. That to me is fascinating. So when I think about, well, how do I take those principles? How do I take those opportunities and move them into an industry, which is also another, multi-billion dollar industry? I think you're sitting on top of a massive amount of untapped potential and these teams are already worth a lot, right? You saw this week, Celtics sold for, I think, 6.1 billion. It's not like they don't view these assets as valuable. I think there's even more value than people realize. I also think that value will produce, which is the right wording, but that value will be even more helpful to the teams that aren't worth 6 billion, right? Like, those teams don't have any. Those teams are doing just fine. right? What about these new and up and coming
Yeah.
leagues? What about women's sports?
Mm.
What about these other leagues who aren't sitting on these massive media rights contracts and massive valuations? You start to apply this to their businesses, and to your point, those struggles that they're probably having of proving how, yes, no, I'm telling you, advertiser, sponsor, this is going to work. This, like they're using the same playbook everyone else is using to do that. And I think that that's a massive opportunity to be really helpful to those other leagues and teams, more of those challenger or newer ones.
Right. Yeah. AI is here and he's here for a long time. You know,
Yeah.
how can
Yeah.
AI help decision makers from coaching staff to league officials make better calls?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly don't do a lot of work on the field or really
Uh-huh.
any. So I stay out of that
Hmm.
arena, so to speak, or the on the pitch, whatever your preferred method. I think that it's no different though. Even though Elevate and the work that we do doesn't really translate on the, to helping refs or partner, things like that. The ability to have more data at the disposal of decision makers is the same concept, right? In this case, the decision maker is a referee versus a marketing manager, right? But at the end of the day, the ability to get more information and put hands in the decision makers, or put that data in the hands of decision
Mm.
makers as fast as possible with as much accuracy as possible is undoubtedly helpful. If I'm a ref and I can say, hey, we've got I've got a collection of data in my head of all the calls I've made and all the things I've seen. But now I can augment that with 50,000 other decisions that have been made by other people across the league. And I can have that to supplement what I'm doing. Why wouldn't I want that, right? Why wouldn't I take that help, and use it to make it to do my job better?
Yeah. Yeah. And on that, you've said, Jim, AI won't take your job, but someone who knows how to use it will. What should sports
Yeah.
professionals do today to stay ahead?
Yeah, it's a funny, provide really good provocation, right? I think the reason that holds true is like any other new technology, right? If I'm working in, one arena and all of a sudden technology is changing the way in which that works, then I need to be able to figure out how to adapt and use that information. If I was managing my team's, newspaper ads and now all my consumers are on the internet, then I need to know how to use the internet to be, like it's those changes are not new. I think I always try to remind people a lot of this is not new, right? The same shifts and changes that happened in the early 90s moving on to the internet, like it's just an era like just like that, right, where there's disruptive change, understandably scary, understandably, it is something that you have to really embrace, but also it's not going to be useful immediately to everybody, and it's not going to, you have to also understand, right, where and when it's going to impact you. So I think that idea of using AI and understanding it, learning about it, that's the most important step, right? Now, there's going to be certain people who this is directly applicable
Hmm.
to, and it's directly applicable to their jobs today. But then to your point, we can't predict, there's going to be others that it's not today, but it's 3, 6 months down the road. So being able to learn about how it works, why it works the way it does, and come up with potential uses for it, I think that's step one. I think you do that and you're putting yourself in a really good position to stay, at the forefront of this, and stay and understand how it's going to become useful and valuable to you. And I think trying to ignore it, to your point, like it's inevitable. Like
Hmm.
these are the types of things you can't put back in the body, like, and certainly this isn't a fad, right? The ability for people to access more data with better accuracy to make better decisions is a no-brainer. Like, why would anyone not want to do that, right? So, are there going to be facets of it that maybe are fads? I'm sure, right? Like everything else, there's going to be people that are testing out applications for different things, and some of those don't pan out. That's the nature of innovation. It's why, I love innovation. This is the nature of what I think is so fascinating and interesting about pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But I also understand it's, that's going to lead to a lot of misses too. And people don't talk about the misses. They only talk about the successes, right? So that, I think that's really what I would say is the best way to engage and leverage this right now. I don't think it's not worth trying to get caught up in, well, I don't know, I don't see a use for this right now, and then therefore I'm going to ignore it, right? It's like that might be fine. You might not have a use case right now, but I think being able to understand, learn about it, like anyone could do that, right?
Yeah, yeah. The sports industry or sports people and fans love challenges, love contests because it's entertaining. The past couple of
Mm-hmm.
months, especially with the new administration in USA, we've seen a lot of talk about the race towards who's going to win this race, AI race.
Mm-hmm.
US is leading, probably together with China. We don't know yet who, you know, who's first, who's second. Europe, they try to get their head around in terms of how can we be involved and be part of this race.
Yeah.
Does it really matter?
Personally, I don't think so. I think that this kind of technology, it's like trying to control the
Hmm.
internet. I know, you look at that and you go, yeah, well, some governments have restricted access to different things, and I understand
Hmm.
that. And that's to some degree true, but also to some degree not. Like, no one owns the internet. No one owns the ability to put up a website to disseminate information. No one owns email. Like, can you control or restrict some of the stuff that gets used and how it gets used? Absolutely. I'm not, oblivious to that. But at the end of the day, these types of technologies and the big, I think that's one of the biggest things that we probably didn't touch on it too much earlier, but the one of the things with LMs is not, we talked very much about like the functionality of it, right? But we didn't really touch on the fact that one of the biggest reasons that I think it's having such a profound impact so
Hmm.
quickly is, I alluded to it, but it's accessible by everybody,
Yeah,
right? What I was
yeah.
pointing out earlier, the beginning of our conversation, right? If I'm a person with a question, I now can have a source to go get an answer to that question. That's transformative, right? Like it really
It
is, and
is.
it's so simple, right? And the simpler these. What my experience with all this is, the simpler something is, the easier it is. It's not, and the easier it is for you to be commercially successful. By the way, right? I built technology that I thought was great and really game changing. No one could figure out how to use it. And so, and guess what? Those businesses didn't really go that well. Right. So, there you go. But my point with this is that with AI, with these LLMs, they're disseminated. A lot of them are open
Hmm.
source. They're available to everybody to use whenever they want. And I don't see a world in which you can really restrict or control that. I also think it's very difficult for these models are all so good. Now you're splitting hairs,
Yeah.
right? This model is better. Like you're splitting hairs, right? The basic ability that any of these LLMs unlock is far beyond the capabilities that are available to you without them.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
The ability to control that, the code's out there. Like they're out there. You can use them. You can turn them on. I really don't think it's going to be something where one person or government or body controls it or not. Now, I do think there's a counterpart point to that I'll make, and which is I do think there's obviously restrictions around the chips that are needed and the technology, the infrastructure and whether that be energy infrastructure or the technology and
Hmm.
the microchip infrastructure to use it, for sure, right? Like that's going to need to, but Moore's law, but the cost of those chips are going to come down. The accessibility of it's going to come down. The compute power of those chips is going to continue to double year over year, and
Hmm.
so it's going to end up being, I think, more accessible over time. The second point is I do think what we'll see is the commercial side of this, right? You think about advertising. Again, Google owns 90% of the search
Yeah.
market. Search is like anyone can build a search engine, right? So that part I don't know. I think that's really the interesting part. Now it's anyone could build anything on top of an LLM that's useful for their business. If I'm a lawyer, I put my legal documents in and I use it, right? Like, so there's no way to control that. I think it's almost the antithesis of a control model where it's open for anyone to use however they
Hmm.
want. So it inherently is hard to control and say, no, you have to use my platform to do this. But we'll see, right? Maybe ChatGPT or Claude or Anthropic or DeepSeek, maybe one of these becomes so good from a commercial
Hmm.
standpoint. Again, the models will be used by everyone, but the commercial side, that one of them starts to dominate, right? And people say, hey, I can only pick from these three, and I'm going to use this. I don't know,
Hmm.
right? That could be very interesting, and then you could see maybe more of a restriction, but it's hard to say. I think how that's going to play out because right now it's I could put some code up on a website and you could start your
Yeah, yeah.
own chat, right? You can start, right? Like,
Hmm.
so how to control
I
that. Yeah.
think I think this narrative that we kept hearing the past couple of months and still now is just a strategy or a tactic to get investors or potential investors to invest in a country and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So, but I fully agree with you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, definitely don't want to understate that there's a lot of like infrastructure, right? And technology that has to be built. Like we're talking about the consumer application. Like I go to Claude, and I pull it up in my browser. It's easy, but behind that sits thousands and thousands of microchips and data set, right? And the investment in all of that for sure, right? Like needs to be there. We're just getting the benefit of the end product.
Mm.
And I do think that it makes sense for everybody to be investing in
Hmm.
this. So that's I guess maybe I'm too, naive about it, but I think it's a good thing in that sense of everyone pushing each other because I do think this can have such a profound impact. I just read an article yesterday in the New York Times. My wife works in women's
Hmm.
healthcare, and so I'm attuned to these kinds of things and what's happening in healthcare with AI. And I know it's a little bit off topic, but I'll cut it short. But suffice to say, like another area, right, where you can have profound impact on people's lives, right, through this because of the ability to look at massive amounts of data, which no single doctor, no single physician could ever, right,
Yeah.
comprehend and use. Now you have thousands of years of data that can be put into it. So I just think that any investment in this space is good investment. If there's, I know there's political bent behind
Hmm.
it, but I think net, I think it's a positive impact to consumers. It's a consumer surplus to society, so to
Mm.
speak.
And in your opinion, Jim, what's the next big breakthrough in AI?
Uh, it's tough. I do think that a big part of this is, and what's coming next with this is the ability to have it use all this data not just to generate a text response to a question.
Hmm.
And I know this is happening, but when you say, I think it's at the nascent stages of having it generate actual outputs that are usable, right? Whether that be video, whether that be, and again, it's like early days with this stuff. And I've been playing around and using a lot of these tools, but it's still very raw. You can't just go into a site and say, create me a 2-minute video with this. Like there's a lot of prompting that still has to take place. I think that's the next big frontier here is how does it go from just reacting to your questions and answering them and maybe creating charts and again and creating videos and stuff, but like really producing content and meaningful, valuable content using this data. I know that the closest I've seen of something that's like very interesting, but still like I don't know how to use it
Hmm.
commercially is, you could go into Notebook LM and you can have it create a podcast of two people talking about data. So you can load data in, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. But I don't know what to do with that, but it's interesting. Okay, now I think the next frontier is okay, how do you take it from interesting to actionable
Hmm.
and and have these things that this content because I still at the end of the day I use obviously we train we execute with a lot of AI in our platform. My goal is not just to have it in there, but how do I get it as close to producing a usable end product for customers as possible,
Hmm.
right?
Great. Great. You're listening to the Pre-Zero Sports Talk. For more conversations on sports leadership, faith, performance, and innovation from Sweden to the world, visit prezerosportstalk.com. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Okay,
Ready for
let's do
speedy
it.
Q&A?
Absolutely, sounds good.
Excellent.
Try my best.
Let's do this. Jim, if you could have a dinner with any athlete, past or present, who will it be?
It'd have to be Tom Brady. He's a Michigan man, and he's also obviously fantastic at what he does. And I've never met him, so I think those two points would be great to connect on.
Mhm. What's your favorite sports moment of all time?
Favorite sports moment of all time when I was there was the Rose Bowl last year when Michigan beat Alabama to get to the national championship. I was there with my wife and my kids, and I'll never forget that moment.
Mhm. If you weren't working in AI, what would you be doing?
I would I'd be a chef. I
Ah,
love cooking.
nice.
Yeah.
Which kind of cuisine or gastronomy?
Italian food mostly.
Italian.
Yeah. Yeah,
Nice.
it's my background, my heritage. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of overlap. You'd actually be surprised. I guess the lightning round, we're slower momentum, but there's actually a lot of overlap,
Hmm.
right? How do I take all these ingredients? How do I build a cohesive dish? How do I take all of these technologies? How do I build a cohesive product? There's actually, yeah.
Yeah, but then you need to have a good quality ingredients, which is not
That's
sure if
that's
AI
right.
can help with that.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's
Because
absolutely true. That is probably the biggest
look, it's funny
challenge
you're talking
for
about
me.
Italian gastronomy.
Yes.
It's funny because look,
Yeah.
I traveled all around the world, and we all love Italian food, and which area, which region compared to any other place in the world.
I could not agree more. We can have a whole podcast just about that.
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to do so. I completely agree. It's one of my biggest frustrations living in the U.S. is, to your point, I can cook some great
Hmm.
dishes, but if I don't have the ingredients, and you just cannot. I import as much as I can from
Okay.
Italy, but it's not as fresh, right? I mean, it's like you go there and they're like, "Oh, I made this dish this, with these ingredients. Where'd you get it from?" They're like, "Oh, it all came from right there. The sheep are right there. The cow, right? Like everything I can see with my eyes where I got it from.
Hmm.
Here, I'm not as lucky. So that is something that I'm very much passionate about and very much agree with
Okay.
you.
And on that, what's your favorite Italian dish?
That's a tough one. I mean, it's hard to say. Pizza margarita is phenomenal.
Hmm.
It's comfort food and it's transient. I also was lucky enough to go to Bologna last
Hmm.
summer with my
Hmm.
family, and we got to sample some stuff. And Bolognese cooking is
Hmm.
fantastic, and everything about it, prosciutto, picking and everything. So if I had to pick one, I mean, I would guess I would say pizza. I also love carbonara, which I had in Rome is it's like none other. But so I'm giving you a poor answer, but those are all the top. I think it's like you said, right? You'd have to go region by if you really want to do it, you have to go region by region.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Would you agree that the best pizza in the world is in Italy, obviously, but it's in Napoli?
I'm hoping to find out. I've not been to Napoli,
You should.
so I have a trip planned this
You
summer.
should.
I'm going in June.
You
I'm
should.
going in
And I
June.
will send you
I'm really
I'll
excited.
send you the address where apparently they invented pizza in Napoli.
Yes,
I will do
please.
that.
Yeah, any recommendations you have, that would be
I will.
fantastic.
I will. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had to explain AI in one sentence to a 5-year-old, what would it say?
AI can take massive amounts of
Hmm.
information and let you ask any question from that info and get back a answer very quickly. But that's what I would try. I would that would be my poor attempt. And my kids seem to just kind of know what AI
Hmm.
is, so they didn't, not for me. So luckily, I haven't had an
Hmm. Yeah.
answer for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an easy one. Yeah.
No, not by any means. No, not by any means. And it's like one of those things where, when my son was growing up, he had an iPad, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden you never taught you never teach them how to swipe, right? But then that's how they get wired, right? And so then he goes up and he would go up to the TV screen,
Yeah.
right? And like, why isn't it right? And you're like, oh, you use a remote. Whatever, it's a remote. I don't, and I think AI is going to be one of those things,
Hmm.
right? Not for my kids a little bit older, but
Hmm.
in the net, kids who are born today and in this few years, they're just not going to know a world without it,
Hmm.
right? And you're not going to your point. you don't have to explain it. It's actually what
Yeah.
they're not going to know any other way than
Yeah.
asking their phone, right? Something, oh, that's AI. And it's just, there's going to be part of their life.
And Jim,
Yeah.
do you think that schools in various countries, jurisdiction, they should start now teaching AI to the little ones?
I absolutely do. Yeah. Like I said, I think it's already embedded. I know kids are using it in school. They're using it to do homework, right? Like, why would we not want to educate people about, because again, there's pros and cons, like, and it's very you're going to make mistakes if you don't know how something works,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think absolutely getting smart about it, understanding it is paramount for anyone, children or otherwise, right? I think everyone needs to get up to speed on it.
Yeah. Favorite book or documentary or maybe a movie on sports?
I mean, I think, the tried and true sports movies, I think of the ones that are like, really well known, the Miracle, like Miracle on Ice, Miracle, like that's one of my
Hmm.
favorites. Books on sports. I don't read a lot of books on sports,
Hmm.
actually. I read a lot of
On
books on
tech? Yeah,
technology. I'm
technology.
surprised. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
I think the biggest single, if I had to give one, I would say it's believe in yourself, and believe in what you can do and what you're capable of. I think it's very hard when you're younger and you have less experience to do
Hmm.
that, and you second guess yourself and you second guess your abilities. And if I had to, I think I could have gotten, you know, been more successful, done more if I had that belief,
Yeah.
and really stuck with it, and more than I did. I think I did, in some areas, but not as much as others. Looking back on
Hmm.
it.
And Jim, where do you see the world of marketing and advertising in the next 3, 4, 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I think I'll try to pull some themes that we spoke about. I think the ability for AI to help you get a better understanding of what customers are doing and therefore how to better market to them is just in the beginning stages. I think a lot of people are throwing AI at the problem, but not necessarily
Hmm.
implementing it to solve the problems. That makes sense. I think the personalization aspect we talked about is again very nascent and can, is just at the beginning stages. And I think that the ability for the feedback loop between what's working, what's not working, how do we adjust, how do we mark, that is, you're never going to get it right. Like I said, it's in my mind, marketing is very much hypothesis driven of all the disciplines. And you have a hypothesis, you're out there, you're trying to prove it, disprove it, what works, what doesn't. Not every campaign, not every idea is going to work. How do I, right? And so if I could speed that cycle up, I think you'll see a lot of progress. Yeah.
Great. Jim Caruso, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Great discussion and had a fantastic time. Thanks. Thank
And
you so
before we
much.
conclude, can you tell our listeners where they can contact you, learn more about your work, or connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit our website. We're up there, oneelevate.com. My email is jim@oneelevate.com. You can drop me a note directly, find me on LinkedIn as well, and happy to engage, respond, and chat with anyone anytime.
Great. As Peter Drucker once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And on that, couldn't be more relevant today as the sports industry navigates a world powered by data, technology, and constant change. We want to thank you for joining our show. If you enjoyed this episode, we have more for you. You can now watch the entire episode on our YouTube and Spotify channels. While you're here, subscribe and don't forget to tap the bell. Visit prezerosportstalk.com to explore more conversations on sports, leadership, faith, performance, and innovation. From Sweden to the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and make a difference. We'll see you soon. Take care.